Do you know how one quiet moment can change a whole life? Do you know how a single choice can open a hidden door in the heart? Do you know what happens when two people step away from noise and finally listen to themselves? Many people believed. Keanu and Sandra had already lived every emotion the world expected from them, yet they had no idea that the most meaningful chapter between them had not happened on any set, any stage, or any red carpet. It happened somewhere far away, somewhere quiet, somewhere only the two of them knew. It happened before anyone even knew such a moment existed. And it began on a day that looked completely normal from the outside, even though everything inside it was waiting to shift. The morning started with soft light touching the curtains of Sandra's home. The type of morning that usually brings peace. But this time, she felt a strange weight she could not explain. She had been moving through a heavy season in her personal life, filled with fast decisions, demanding work, and quiet battles she kept locked behind her smile. She felt tired in ways she could not describe, like she was carrying many emotions alone, afraid that speaking them out loud would break the fragile balance she tried to keep. She held those feelings inside for too long, and they were beginning to change her days in small but painful ways. Then her phone buzzed, and everything shifted with one simple message. It was from Keanu, written in the same gentle tone he always used with her. A tone that respected every boundary, yet carried a warmth she always understood. He wrote that he had something planned, something simple, something calm, something he believed she needed. He told her he would pick her up, and he told her not to ask questions because he wanted her mind to rest for once. Sandra read the message twice, then felt an emotion rise in her chest, something between relief and fear because she trusted him deeply. But she also knew how much she had been hiding from herself. She agreed. Later that afternoon, when Keanu arrived, he stepped out of the car with that quiet presence that always made people feel safe. He wore simple clothes, nothing dramatic, nothing that demanded attention. His calm energy softened the air around him. Sandra walked towards him, and for a moment they simply looked at each other as if both were silently checking whether the other was truly okay. The truth was that both of them were tired in different ways, both carrying memories and responsibilities. That made their lives feel heavier than anyone would guess. Yet in that moment, they each softened just a little, because they knew they were stepping into something meant to heal. Keanu opened the door for her, and she smiled. It was a small smile, but a real one, and he noticed it because he always noticed the small things. As she sat down, the warm air inside the car made her shoulders relax. He got in on his side, closed the door gently, and began driving without telling her where they were going. She liked that. She liked not having to think, not having to plan, not having to pretend to be strong. She liked the silence too, a silence that was never uncomfortable with him, a silence that held meaning. After a long drive past the city, the roads began to change. Trees grew thicker, the air felt cleaner, and sunlight touched the branches at soft angles. Sandra watched the scenery quietly, her mind drifting through memories she had avoided all week. Keanu glanced at her sometimes, not to intrude, but to check if she was okay. He could sense her thoughts, and she understood that he knew she needed space to breathe. That was the thing about him. He understood human pain in ways many people did not. He knew when to step in and when to stay still, and he respected the soft weight inside a person's heart. After a while, they reached a hidden mountain road that Sandra had never seen before. The car slowly climbed upward through curves surrounded by green woods, patches of sunlight flickering over the windshield. She turned towards him, confused but intrigued. Keanu just smiled, the kind of smile that revealed nothing yet promised everything. She felt something warm spread through her chest, a quiet trust that made her lean back and let the moment take her. When they reached the top of the mountain, the view made her breath catch. It was peaceful, wide open, shining with layers of color that blended sky and land together. There was a small wooden path leading to a quiet cliff where the world felt distant and gentle. The wind carried the scent of pine and soil, and the air felt untouched by noise or pressure. Sandra stepped out slowly, feeling the ground beneath her feet, and something inside her began to loosen. Keanu walked ahead and stopped near the edge, where the wind moved his hair and the sunlight framed his face. Sandra watched him for a moment and felt a familiar emotion rise, something she always tried to ignore but never fully could. Admiration mixed with gratitude, mixed with a strange pull she had learned to hide for many years. He turned around and looked at her, his expression soft and open, and she felt seen in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. He told her that he brought her here because he knew she had been holding too much inside. He told her that she did not need to explain anything, did not need to perform strength, did not need to hide. He told her that everyone deserves a place where they can breathe without fear. His voice was low and slow, like he wanted every word to land gently, and Sandra felt something inside her start to tremble. Then he reached into the back of the car and pulled out something wrapped in a small cloth. She frowned, unsure, and he walked towards her with careful steps. He placed the cloth in her hands and told her to open it. When she did, she found an old camera inside, a vintage piece with scratches and marks from long years of use. She looked at him, confused, wondering why he brought her such a thing. He told her it belonged to someone important in his past, someone who taught him to slow down, to observe, to breathe. He told her he wanted her to have it for the day, so she could see the world with new eyes, so she could capture anything that helped her feel alive again. The gesture hit her heart so strongly that she could not speak for several seconds. She held the camera gently, running her fingers over the worn metal, feeling the story inside it. Something warm spread inside her chest, and the heavy emotions she had been carrying began to move upward, like they wanted to escape through her breath. She looked at him again, and this time there was no hiding. Her voice trembled when she thanked him. Keanu noticed the emotion behind the words. He smiled, but then something unexpected happened. Sandra tried to lift the camera for a picture, but her hands shook slightly. The shake was small, but Keanu saw it immediately. He stepped closer, gently placed his hands over hers, and helped her steady the camera. The warmth of his hands traveled through her arms, and she felt her chest tighten in a way she could not explain. Their faces were close, their breaths soft, and for a moment the world felt still. The moment lasted only a breath, but it felt powerful enough to shift something between them. But before she could take the picture, a sudden gust of wind pushed against them. Sandra stepped back instinctively, but her foot slipped near a loose stone at the edge. She gasped as her balance tilted. Keanu reacted instantly, grabbing her arm with both hands and pulling her back with firm strength. Her heart raced, her breath caught, and for a moment she felt the shock of what almost happened. Keanu held her a little longer than necessary, making sure she was safe. Their eyes met again, and this time there was no silence, no shield, no distance. Something unspoken passed between them, something deeper than the day had planned and just. When Sandra thought she could gather her breath again, Keanu whispered something to her, something she did not expect at all, something that made her whole world tilt in a way nothing else had. And that was the moment everything changed. The moment Keanu whispered those words, Sandra felt her heartbeat change in a way she could not fully control. He spoke softly, almost as if he was afraid of breaking something delicate inside the air between them. He told her that he brought her here not only to help her breathe, but also because he had something on his mind for a long time, something he never knew how to say, something he hoped she was finally ready to hear. His voice was steady, yet carried a weight that made Sandra feel both curious and afraid. She looked at him as the wind moved through the trees. Brushing her hair lightly over her shoulders, she expected him to pull back or change the subject, because Keanu often hid his deeper emotions behind quiet gestures, but this time he did not. Instead, he kept watching her with the kind of honesty that made it impossible to pretend she did not understand. The meaning under his words? Sandra felt her mouth go dry for a second, and she looked away at the mountains, trying to gather the courage to ask him what he meant. Before she could speak, Keanu gently took the old camera from her hands and lifted it towards the horizon. He told her that sometimes people carry heavy shadows inside them. The only way to release those shadows is to face them gently, without fear or judgment. He told her that she had been carrying many shadows lately, and he saw them even when she tried to smile through them. He said he brought her here so she could leave one of those shadows behind, even if it was only one. He said that was enough for today. His words reached something deep inside her, something she had been hiding for months. She felt her throat tighten, and for a moment she thought tears might come, but she held them back. She told him she did not know where to start. Keanu stepped closer, lifted the camera strap, and placed it carefully around her neck. Then he touched her shoulder lightly and said that she could start anywhere, even with silence. He said, "Silence sometimes reveals more truth than words." They stood at the edge of the cliff in quiet stillness. The wind softened, and the world around them felt like it was waiting for Sandra to speak. She finally took a deep breath and whispered that she had felt lost for a long time. She had been moving through her days like she was watching her own life from a distance. She told him that work had become one long blur, her feelings had become tangled, and she no longer knew how to rest. She told him that she felt guilty for being overwhelmed, even though people always saw her as someone strong and calm. Keanu listened without interrupting her, letting every word land without judgment. When she confessed that she felt like she was disappointing people, he shook his head gently and told her that she did not owe anyone perfection. He said the world often expects too much from good people, and that sometimes the most compassionate hearts suffer the most quietly. His voice was low and steady, and Sandra felt a warmth move through her chest, something that made her steady her breath. She lowered her head and admitted that she had been afraid to tell anyone how she felt because she did not want to worry them. Keanu smiled softly and told her that she had already been doing something far more difficult than worrying others. She had been trying to heal alone. He told her, "No one deserves to heal alone." He said the heart is not designed to carry the full weight of pain by itself. Those words made her chest tighten again, not with sadness but with recognition. She looked at him with watery eyes, and he stepped closer and gently placed his hand on her arm. He told her that he understood what it felt like to hold quiet storms inside, and that he learned long ago that sharing even a small part of the pain helps the soul feel lighter. He told her she did not have to share everything, just something small, something she could release today. Her shoulders softened, and she finally let herself speak a truth she had not told anyone. She said she felt tired of pretending she was okay when she was not. She said she was tired of smiling when her heart felt heavy, tired of giving energy when she had none left, tired of always being the one who kept everything together. Keanu nodded gently and said that she did not need to be the strong one today. He said he could be strong for both of them for a little while. The words felt like a warm blanket around her heart. After a long pause, Sandra lifted the old camera and looked through the lens. The world appeared softer through it, the mountains glowing with natural light, the sky stretching in layers of warm blue and pale gold. She took a picture, and the sound of the shutter felt like the release of a small weight inside her. Keanu noticed the change in her expression and smiled. He told her that every picture she took today would capture a new breath she allowed herself to feel. They walked along a wooden path lined with small wildflowers swaying softly in the wind. Sandra felt her steps grow lighter, her shoulders more relaxed. Keanu pointed at little things along the path, the curve of a branch, the shimmer of light through leaves, the shape of a distant hill that she had not noticed earlier. He told her that when life becomes too loud, the soul forgets how to see beauty, and he wanted her to remember again as they continued walking. They reached a small clearing with a gentle slope that overlooked a valley filled with quiet green patches. Sandra sat down on the grass, her legs stretched out, the sun warming her skin. Keanu sat beside her, leaning back on his hands, letting the breeze brush across his face. For a while they said nothing, and the silence felt healing. Sandra closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks she felt something calm inside her, something peaceful. She whispered that she missed feeling connected to herself. And Keanu said that the world often teaches people to rush past their own hearts, but the heart always finds a way to call them back. She looked at him thoughtfully and asked how he learned these things. He hesitated for a moment, then admitted that he had gone through a long season of pain in his past, and that pain forced him to understand the sensitive parts of life deeply. He told her that he learned how to sit with his own hurt, how to rebuild slowly, how to breathe again. He said that healing is not loud. Healing is quiet and patient. His words touched her deeply. She reached out and placed her hand gently over his, not for comfort, but for connection. Keanu looked at her hand resting on his, then looked into her eyes with a softness that held years of unspoken understanding. They sat like that for a while, their hands resting together, the sun warm around them. But then, something changed. A shift in the wind made Keanu look toward the trees. Sandra followed his gaze. Something about the air suddenly felt different. It's not threatening, but unexpected, like the world was signaling the start of a new turn in their story. Keanu stood up slowly, helping Sandra rise, and gently guided her back toward the wooden path. They walked deeper into the forest until they reached a hidden spot that Sandra had no idea existed. It was a small cabin tucked between tall pine trees, old but beautifully kept. With warm wooden walls and a little porch that faced the valley, Sandra froze when she saw it, because she sensed instantly that this place held meaning. Keanu watched her reaction, his expression both tender and uncertain. Sandra turned to him, feeling her heart beat harder. She asked him quietly whose cabin it was. Keanu paused, his eyes softening with a memory she had never seen in them before. Then he finally answered. He said the cabin belonged to someone he once loved deeply. Someone who shaped him, someone who changed his life forever, someone he never thought he would bring anyone else here to meet. The words hit Sandra like a quiet wave, and before she could ask anything else, Keanu reached for the door. The moment he opened it, Sandra felt her whole world tilt again. Inside the cabin, something waited for her, something she did not expect, something that connected to her in a way she never saw coming. When Keanu opened the door of the small wooden cabin, Sandra felt a chill move gently down her spine. Not from fear, but from recognition that she was stepping into a part of his life that he rarely allowed anyone to see. The air inside smelled like pine and old paper, a warm and quiet scent that carried years of memories. The sunlight slipping through the tiny windows painted soft golden shapes across the wooden floor, creating an atmosphere that felt untouched and sacred. Sandra stood completely still. Taking in the silence as if it were something fragile, Keanu stepped inside first, moving with slow, careful steps, almost like he was visiting the past rather than entering a space. Sandra followed him, her breath light, her heart beating with a slow and steady anticipation. She had known Keanu for many years, had shared countless scenes with him, had laughed and cried beside him in fictional worlds and real ones, but she had never seen him look this open, this vulnerable. She sensed that whatever he was inviting her into now was something deeper than anything he had shared. For the cabin was simple but beautiful. A small wooden table stood near the window, holding a stack of old journals tied with string. There were framed sketches on the walls, pencil drawings of mountains, trees, and quiet lakes. A soft blanket lay folded at the end of a narrow bed beside the wall. A bookshelf full of worn novels leaned slightly to one side, as if time had touched it gently. Everything inside felt personal, intimate, and full of quiet stories. Sandra noticed a photograph on the table, but before she could look at it closely, Keanu lightly touched her hand, guiding her toward the small seating area near the window. He asked her to sit for a moment because there was something he needed to explain before she saw anything else. She nodded slowly and sat down, her fingers resting softly on her lap. Keanu stood across from her, his hands tucked into his pockets. The sunlight catching the edges of his hair, he told her that this cabin belonged to someone he once cared for deeply, someone who helped him understand the meaning of gentleness and strength. He said this person taught him how to slow down, how to breathe, how to find peace in small things. He told her that this cabin held memories of quiet conversations, shared hopes, and lessons that shaped the way he treated people. He said he had not brought anyone here in a very long time because the memories were too meaningful to expose carelessly. Sandra felt a warm ache in her chest. She understood that he was trusting her with something fragile and personal. She asked him softly why he brought her here now, today, on this specific trip. Keanu took a slow breath, his gaze drifting toward the journals on the table. He said he brought her here because he knew she was carrying pain she did not deserve to carry alone, and because he felt she was ready to understand a part of him that explained why he cared for her the way he did. He told her that healing sometimes requires stepping into the quiet places of the past. He walked toward the table and picked up one of the journals. The cover was worn, the edges frayed, the paper inside slightly yellowed. He held it gently in his hands, as if it were delicate. He brought it to her and placed it on her lap. She looked down at the faded handwriting on the first page, a name she did not recognize. yet it filled the room with a sense of gentle presence. Sandra looked up at him, waiting for the story behind it. Keanu sat beside her, his posture soft, his voice lower than before. He told her that the person who owned the journal was someone who helped him through a very difficult period of his life, someone who had shown him how to find calm inside chaos. He said that even after that person was gone, continued to return to this cabin because it reminded him of lessons about kindness, patience, and listening to the heart. Sandra felt her throat tighten as she heard the tenderness in his voice. A tenderness she had always felt, but rarely seen, expressed so openly. She asked if he still wrote in these journals. And Keanu nodded. He told her he still came here from time to time to write thoughts he did not want to lose, hopes he needed to protect, or fears he did not want to carry into the world. He told her that writing helped him see himself clearly, and he thought that reading some of the pages might help her too. Sandra brushed her fingers over the journal cover, feeling the texture of time on it. Something inside her softened, something that felt like a quiet permission to feel everything she had been hiding. She opened the journal, and the handwriting inside flowed gently across the page, filled with simple thoughts about life, kindness, pain, and healing. Sandra read a few lines and felt a warm pressure behind her eyes. The words were honest and human, speaking about loss, strength, and the beauty of small moments. As she flipped a few pages, she found sketches inside soft pencil drawings of hands, trees, and moments captured without words. She felt the presence of the person who once sat here, drawing these lines, writing these thoughts, loving these quiet days. When she looked up at Keanu, he was watching her with calm understanding. She told him the journal felt like a conversation with someone who truly understood fragile emotions. He nodded and said that this was why he brought her here, because he wanted her to feel seen in a way that silence alone could not offer. He said he believed she needed a moment where she could let her heart breathe without fear of being misunderstood. Sandra closed the journal gently, fingers lingering on the edges. She told him she felt something shift inside her, like a part of her that had been locked away was slowly opening. Keanu smiled softly, the type of smile that carried relief and compassion. He told her that healing often starts when people allow themselves to be held by something gentle, whether it is a memory, a person, or a quiet place. They sat together for a long moment, the silence warm and deep. Sandra finally asked him something she had been holding inside since they arrived. She asked why he chose today, of all days, to bring her into this part of his life. Keanu hesitated for the first time since they entered the cabin. He looked toward the window, then back at her, his expression thoughtful and vulnerable. He told her that he sensed something in her last week, something in the way she smiled during their interview, something in the pause between her words, something in her eyes when the camera stopped rolling. He said he recognized the quiet weight she carried because he had carried the same weight once. He said he knew she needed a place where she could let that weight fall. He said he did not want her to reach a point where she felt alone with her pain. The honesty in his words touched her so deeply that she placed her hand over her mouth, trying to keep her emotions steady. She felt grateful in a way she had not felt in years. She reached for Keanu's hand and held it gently, their fingers interlacing naturally, as if this connection had been waiting for the right moment. But something unexpected happened then. Keanu stood up slowly and walked toward the shelf near the corner of the cabin. He reached for a small wooden box, old but beautifully carved. Sandra watched him with curiosity as he brought it toward her. He placed it on the table between them and opened it gently. Inside the box lay a set of small Polaroid photographs, each one capturing moments filled with quiet emotion. Sandra's breath caught as she looked closer, because some of the photographs were of her. Not recent ones, but old ones, pictures taken years ago on sets, during interviews, backstage, or during moments she never noticed him capturing. Each photo showed her in natural, unguarded moments of joy, thoughtfulness, or gentle vulnerability. They were pictures only someone who truly saw her could have taken. Sandra looked up at him, stunned, her voice barely a whisper as she asked him why he kept these. Keanu looked down at the wooden floor for a moment, then lifted his gaze to her with eyes full of quiet truth. He told her that he had kept those photos because they reminded him of the kind of strength that does not show itself loudly. He said they reminded him of her kindness, her warmth, her ability to make others feel safe. He said he kept them not out of admiration alone, but because they helped him through some of his own lonely days. He told her that she had no idea how often her presence had brought him peace, even from a distance. Sandra felt her heart twist gently. Overwhelmed by emotions she had never expected to feel today. She tried to speak, but her voice trembled too much. She looked at the photographs again, then back at him. Her eyes filled with a blend of gratitude, shock, and something deeper she was afraid to name. Keanu stepped closer, placing one hand lightly on her shoulder. He said there was something he needed to tell her, something he had been holding inside for a very long time. His voice grew softer, the air between them heavier and more intimate. Sandra felt her heartbeat deepen, her breath slow, her mind searching for what he was about to reveal. Then Keanu took a slow breath and spoke the words she never expected. But before he could finish, the door of the cabin creaked. Someone else was there. Someone Sandra did not expect. Someone who knew Keanu's past. Someone who carried a truth that would change everything.
The door creaked slowly, and Sandra froze. Her heartbeat skipped once, then twice, as the wooden cabin filled with a faint rustling sound. Keanu instinctively stepped a little in front of Sandra, not in fear, but in a natural protective reaction that came from somewhere honest inside him. The moment felt suspended in the air, the soft crackle of old wood echoing louder than it should. Sandra's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, her breath held still as the door opened wider. A gentle figure stepped inside, moving carefully as if trying not to disturb the quiet energy in the room. The person was older, dressed in soft, earth-colored clothes, with hair touched by years and eyes that carried stories of their own. Sandra did not recognize them, but something in the person's posture told her they belonged to the history of this cabin in a deep and meaningful way. The stranger paused near the entrance, their gaze settling softly on Keanu first, then on Sandra. Keanu relaxed slightly, though a hint of surprise still lingered in his expression. He greeted the person by name, a name Sandra had never heard before, spoken with warmth and familiarity. The older person smiled gently and stepped fully inside, closing the door behind them with care. The soft thud echoed through the room, and for a moment Sandra felt like she was standing inside someone's memory rather than a place on a mountain. The visitor apologized for arriving without warning. They explained that they had come to check on the cabin, as they usually did, making sure it stayed warm and safe even when Keanu was not there. Sandra listened quietly, her curiosity rising with every word. There was something calm and steady about the person, something that made her shoulders slowly relax. They spoke to Keanu with affection, calling him by a nickname she had never heard before, a nickname that softened the edges of his usually quiet demeanor. Keanu introduced Sandra gently, his voice carrying a certain reverence as he said her name. The visitor's eyes brightened with recognition, the kind of recognition that came from hearing Keanu talk about her long before this day. They greeted her kindly, saying they had heard many things about her from Keanu over the years. Sandra felt a warm blush spread across her cheeks, surprised and touched by the implication that Keanu had spoken about her so often and with such appreciation. The older visitor stepped deeper into the cabin, their hands touching the wooden table fondly, as if remembering moments that once lived inside these walls. They glanced at the journals, the photographs, the familiar objects that had gathered dust and memory over the years. Sandra noticed a softness in their expression, a gentleness that carried quiet understanding. She sensed immediately that this person had been part of Keanu's healing, part of the story he had been slowly letting her see. The visitor asked Keanu if he had finally decided to share the cabin's story. He nodded quietly, glancing at Sandra with a tenderness that made her chest tighten. The older person smiled warmly and told Sandra that this place had helped many hearts find clarity. They said they were glad Keanu was sharing it with someone who deserved that peace. Sandra felt the words settle deep inside her, warming places she had kept closed for too long. They walked around the cabin together, Keanu and the older visitor moving with familiarity while Sandra observed the quiet bond between them. She learned that the visitor had been a close friend to the person who once owned this cabin. They had watched Keanu grow, watched him heal, watched him return to this place whenever he needed to remember what truly mattered. They had seen the young man he was and the gentle soul he became, and they spoke about him with pride. As the three of them talked, the visitor noticed the wooden box of Polaroids on the table. They smiled knowingly and said they remembered the day Keanu took some of those pictures. They told Sandra that Keanu had always had a quiet admiration for her, an admiration that showed itself not in dramatic gestures, but in small moments of attention. They said he carried her presence with him like a steady light during darker days. Sandra's breath caught, the weight of the revelation hitting her with unexpected force. The visitor turned to Keanu and asked softly whether he had already told Sandra the truth behind those photographs. Keanu's eyes lowered for a moment, as if balancing the emotion inside him. He told the visitor he had been trying to, but the moment had shifted when they arrived. The visitor chuckled gently, saying that timing has its own way of arranging itself. Then they looked at Sandra with a soft seriousness and said she deserved to hear the full story. Sandra felt her chest grow tight again, anticipation rising. The visitor sat down on the small wooden bench, inviting both of them to sit as well. Keanu sat beside Sandra, not too close but close enough that their shoulders almost touched, their breaths aligning with the quiet rhythm of the room. The visitor placed their hands gently on their lap, took a calm breath, and began to speak. They explained that the person who once lived in this cabin, Keanu's dear friend, had seen something in him long ago, something fragile and strong at the same time. They said that after a deeply painful loss in Keanu's life, he had almost disappeared into silence, unable to find meaning in anything around him. He came here to escape the noise and the questions, to sit with his grief in a place where nothing demanded anything from him. The visitor paused, their eyes gentle and full of memory. They said Keanu's friend helped him heal, not by offering solutions, but by teaching him how to see beauty again, how to breathe again, how to find light even when life felt unbearably heavy. They said Keanu rebuilt himself here, piece by piece, day by day, in the quiet safety of these mountains. Sandra listened with her heart open, her breath slow, her eyes warm with empathy. She felt honored to be trusted with such a tender part of his past. The visitor then revealed something Sandra had never expected. They said that during that difficult period, there was one thing, one person, who consistently brought a small spark of light into Keanu's dark days. Someone Keanu barely spoke to during that time. Someone who had no idea they were helping him. Someone who appeared on a television screen one night when he felt completely lost. Someone who made him smile when he thought he had forgotten how. That someone was Sandra. Sandra's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened, her hands trembling slightly on her lap. She looked at Keanu, shocked, searching for any sign that the story was exaggerated or misunderstood. But Keanu's expression was soft and raw, his eyes lowered in quiet truth. The visitor continued, saying that Keanu would sit in this cabin, watching interviews or clips where Sandra spoke with warmth, humor, or kindness. They said her presence, through a screen, helped him feel human again. They said her energy reminded him of gentleness, reminded him of compassion, reminded him that people could still radiate light even when life felt heavy. Sandra felt tears well up, her chest swelling with emotion she could not contain. She whispered that she never knew. Keanu finally lifted his gaze, meeting her eyes with a vulnerability she had never seen so clearly before. He told her that she had unknowingly helped him through one of the darkest chapters of his life, and he had always wanted to tell her but never found the right moment. The visitor watched them quietly, letting the truth settle between them. Sandra placed her hand over her heart, feeling it race, feeling it ache, feeling it soften. She looked at Keanu, her voice trembling as she asked him why he never told her earlier. Keanu opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the visitor suddenly noticed something outside the window. A shadow, moving, slowly, deliberately. Their expression changed, their eyes narrowing with concern. They stood up suddenly. And in a calm but urgent voice, they told Keanu something that made his entire face tighten in shock. Something that changed the peaceful mood instantly. Something Sandra was not prepared for. Something that would turn their quiet trip into something much deeper and far more complicated. The moment the visitor's expression shifted, Sandra felt the air tighten around them. The gentle warmth inside the cabin suddenly changed into something alert, something quietly serious. The visitor stepped closer to the window, their eyes following the slow movement of a shadow outside. Keanu's posture straightened, his eyes narrowing with instinctive concern. Sandra felt her pulse rise, her breath growing shallow as she tried to understand what was happening. The visitor placed a hand lightly on the window frame and leaned in, studying the figure outside with sharp, careful attention. Sandra could not see clearly from where she sat, but she felt the tension growing like a soft pressure in the room. Keanu moved closer to the window as well, keeping his body slightly angled in front of Sandra without even thinking about it. The visitor whispered something under their breath, something that sent a quiet ripple through Keanu's expression. Sandra stood up slowly, her heart beating with a nervous rhythm. She asked what they saw, her voice low, almost hesitant. The visitor turned toward her, their face calm but serious. They told her that the person outside had no reason to be on this mountain trail at this hour, especially near the cabin. They said that only a few people knew how to reach this place, and strangers almost never wandered this high without a purpose. Keanu's eyes hardened slightly, not with anger but with focused concern. He stepped away from the window and told Sandra gently to stay close. She nodded, trusting him instinctively, her breath trembling just a little. The visitor moved to the door, listening carefully to the sound of footsteps outside. The silence between the sounds felt heavy, as if the mountain itself was waiting. After a moment, the shadow outside shifted again. This time, the visitor recognized the movement and exhaled with quiet relief. They turned to Keanu and told him that the person outside was not a stranger after all, but someone connected to the history of this cabin, someone who had not been here in a long time. Sandra's eyes widened slightly, curiosity overtaking her earlier fear. Keanu's shoulders relaxed a little, though a note of uncertainty remained. The visitor opened the door slowly, and a gentle breeze entered the cabin. The air carried the scent of pine and cold earth. The figure outside stepped forward, and Sandra finally saw who it was. An older woman dressed in hiking clothes stood just a few steps away. Her face held a mixture of exhaustion and gentle strength. Her eyes were warm but carried a deep sadness, a sadness that seemed to reach beyond the moment. When the woman looked at Keanu, her face softened, as if seeing someone who held a piece of her heart. Keanu greeted her with quiet respect, his voice low and warm. Sandra watched the interaction, sensing a layered history between them that she did not yet understand. The visitor invited the woman inside, and she stepped in slowly, her gaze drifting across the cabin with a sense of nostalgia. The woman looked at the old journals, the photographs, the small wooden box, and Sandra saw her eyes fill with emotion. She reached out and touched the table gently, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood as if remembering something that lived deep inside her past. Keanu stood beside Sandra, his presence steady, his silence thoughtful. The woman turned to Sandra and introduced herself. Her voice was soft, steady, and touched with warmth. She explained that she had been close to the person who once lived in this cabin. She said she had shared stories, laughter, grief, and lessons here long before Sandra ever knew this place existed. She said she had come to check on the cabin after hearing that Keanu was visiting again. The woman then looked at Keanu with a tender sadness in her eyes, a sadness that made Sandra's heart tighten. She told him that she had been carrying something for a long time, something she wanted to say, but she never found the courage before. Keanu stepped closer, listening with quiet focus. Sandra watched them both, her curiosity growing with each breath. The woman took a slow breath, steadying her voice. She told Keanu that the person who once lived here, the one who helped him heal, had left something behind for him, something he never received. Something personal, something important. The visitor turned toward her, surprised, asking why she never delivered it sooner. The woman's voice shook slightly as she explained that she had not been ready. Grief had held her still for a long time. She said she had avoided returning to this mountain because it carried too many memories. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small leather envelope, worn but well kept. She held it tenderly, as if it carried the weight of many years. She walked toward Keanu and placed it gently in his hands. Keanu looked down at it, his expression shifting from confusion to quiet shock. Sandra felt her heart race as she watched him hold the envelope, sensing the emotion inside the moment. Keanu sat down slowly, the envelope resting on his palms like something fragile. Sandra sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. She watched him carefully, her breath held lightly as he examined the worn edges and delicate stitching. The woman told him that the envelope had been written during the final days of the person he had cared for, days filled with reflection and deep emotion. She said the letter inside was meant for him, a message he was supposed to receive long ago. Keanu hesitated, his fingers trembling slightly as he prepared to open the envelope. Sandra saw the vulnerability in his eyes, a vulnerability she had never seen this raw before. She placed her hand gently on his arm, grounding him with quiet support. He looked at her, his gaze softening, drawing strength from her presence. Slowly, Keanu opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter, aged and slightly faded, written in handwriting that looked familiar to him. He unfolded it with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the first lines. Sandra watched his expression change, first into surprise, then into warmth, then into something deeper, something almost painful yet beautiful at the same time. The cabin fell silent as Keanu read. The woman and the visitor stepped back respectfully, giving him space. Sandra remained beside him, her heart aching with empathy, even though she did not yet know what the letter said. Keanu finished reading the letter, closed his eyes for a moment, and released a slow breath. When he opened his eyes again, they were filled with a deep emotion Sandra could not fully name. He turned to her, his voice trembling slightly as he said her name. Sandra leaned closer, her heart pounding. She asked him softly what the letter said. Keanu looked at the paper in his hands, then at her, his next words filled with weight and meaning. He said the letter held a message that connected the past to the present and to her. But before he could explain, the woman suddenly gasped softly, looking at the window again. Her eyes widened with recognition. The visitor's face turned pale. Keanu stood up instantly. Outside the cabin, someone else had arrived, someone unexpected, someone who should not know this place even existed. And when Sandra saw the silhouette, her entire world shifted. Final chapter: when Sandra saw the silhouette outside the cabin, her breath caught in her throat. The figure stood still for a moment, almost blending with the trees behind them, as if deciding whether to step forward or turn away. The air inside the cabin grew tight, every heartbeat echoing in the wooden walls. Keanu moved toward the door with slow, careful steps, his shoulders steady but his eyes alert. Sandra felt her pulse rise as the visitor and the woman exchanged tense glances, understanding something unspoken between them. The figure finally stepped forward into the light, and Sandra froze. It was a young woman, no more than her late 20s or early 30s, with soft eyes and a familiar quietness in her expression. She looked both nervous and determined, as if she had spent a long journey convincing herself she needed to be here. Sandra could not recognize her at first, but something in the woman's face felt strangely connected to the cabin, to the journals, to the stories living inside these wooden walls. The older woman gasped gently and whispered the young woman's name. It was a name Sandra had seen written inside one of the old journals earlier, a name that belonged to the person who once lived here. Sandra's heart dropped softly. She understood instantly. This young woman was the daughter of the person who had helped Keanu heal long ago. The young woman stepped inside, her eyes filled with old sadness and fresh curiosity. She looked around the cabin, touching the walls lightly as if feeling the presence of memories she had never fully known. She explained that she found old letters mentioning this place and had finally gathered the courage to come. She said she wanted to understand the part of her mother's life that she never fully saw, the part that had shaped her mother into the gentle soul she was. Her voice trembled as she admitted she had waited many years to visit because the grief had been too heavy. She said she came today because something inside her told her it was time. She said she never expected to find anyone here, let alone Keanu himself. Keanu stepped closer, his voice soft and genuine as he welcomed her. He told her that her mother had been one of the most important people he ever met. He said she had helped him through a time when he felt completely lost. He said she taught him kindness in silence, strength through gentleness, and courage through stillness. The young woman listened, her eyes shimmering with emotion. She asked quietly if her mother had left anything behind for her as well. The older woman and the visitor exchanged a look, then directed her toward a small drawer under the shelf. Sandra watched as the young woman approached it slowly and opened it with trembling hands. Inside the drawer lay a small notebook wrapped in cloth. Her breath shook as she held it, recognizing the handwriting instantly. It was her mother's. She began to cry softly, and Keanu moved to her side, offering silent support. Sandra felt her heart swell, witnessing a moment that felt like a healing circle closing around all of them. The air inside the cabin grew warm with shared emotion, the kind that does not need to be spoken aloud. After several minutes, the young woman wiped her tears and looked at Sandra. She said she knew who Sandra was, not as an actress, but as someone her mother had admired quietly. She said her mother used to talk about Sandra's interviews, her warmth, her sincerity, her humor. She said her mother believed Sandra had a rare kind of kindness that could lift a heavy day, even for strangers. Sandra felt a gentle ache inside her chest, overwhelmed by the hidden connection she never knew existed. She stepped closer and offered the young woman a soft embrace. The young woman accepted, holding on to her with quiet gratitude. When they pulled apart, Keanu finally sat down again, the letter still in his hands. Sandra returned to sit beside him, their shoulders touching softly. The young woman and the visitor stood quietly near the door, giving them space. Sandra looked at the letter again and finally asked Keanu to tell her what it said. Keanu took a slow breath, steadying his voice. He told her that the letter was written by his friend during their final days. The words carried deep tenderness, wisdom, and a request he never expected. The letter said that healing does not end when grief softens. Healing becomes complete only when the heart chooses to love life again, to open itself again, to trust again. The letter said that Keanu would someday meet someone who carried the same gentle strength he admired, someone who understood quiet pain and quiet joy, someone who cared with sincerity, someone who could walk beside him with calm honesty. The letter said that when he met that person, he should not hide his feelings. He should not protect himself behind silence. He should not wait for the perfect moment. The letter said he should trust that his heart would recognize them. Sandra felt her breath tremble. She asked Keanu softly what that had to do with her. Keanu looked into her eyes, and for the first time all day, he let every wall inside him fall. His voice was low, steady, warm, and raw with truth. He told her that he had recognized that person a long time ago. He told her that she had unknowingly helped him heal during one of his darkest seasons. He told her that her kindness had reached him when nothing else did. He told her that every time he saw her smile, something inside him felt like hope again. He told her that he never knew how to tell her because he did not want to disrupt her life, or complicate their friendship, or misplace his feelings. But when he read the letter today, he felt something inside him settle, something that told him he had kept silent long enough. Sandra's eyes filled with emotion. She felt her heart open, gently and fully, as if the truth she had been avoiding finally stepped into the light. She admitted that she had always felt something deep for him as well, something she pushed aside because their lives were busy, their paths uncertain, their timing never right. She said she admired him not as an actor but as a human being, a gentle soul who carried pain and kindness with equal strength. Keanu reached out and took her hand, intertwining their fingers with a quiet certainty. Sandra squeezed his hand gently, her eyes warm with tears. The visitor and the two women watched silently, their expressions soft and full of understanding. The cabin felt alive with warmth, memories, and the beginning of something beautiful. The young woman approached them slowly and told Keanu that her mother would have been happy to see this moment. She said her mother believed in gentle connections, in souls that met for a reason, in hearts that recognized each other through kindness. Sandra felt tears spill down her cheeks, touched by the quiet blessing. Keanu stood up, pulling Sandra gently into a warm embrace. It was not dramatic or rushed. It was gentle, full of meaning, full of gratitude, full of something that felt like healing rising from both their chests. The sun outside began to set, casting a warm orange glow into the cabin. The light wrapped around them softly, as if the mountain itself was giving its quiet approval. The younger woman stepped outside to give them space, and the visitor followed. The older woman stayed near the doorway, smiling gently at the scene before her. Sandra rested her head on Keanu's chest, listening to his heartbeat. He held her with steady arms, pressing a soft kiss against her hair. The warmth between them felt honest, safe, and deeply human. After a long moment, Sandra pulled back slightly and smiled with quiet emotion. She told him she felt lighter than she had in a long time. Keanu smiled back and said that sometimes healing happens when hearts finally stop running and simply rest beside someone who understands. They stepped out of the cabin together, hand in hand, breathing in the cool mountain air. The sky stretched wide above them, glowing with soft colors. The path back to the cliff felt different now, not like an escape, but like a beginning. Keanu squeezed her hand gently and whispered that their lives had always crossed at the right moments, and maybe this one was the most meaningful of all. Sandra leaned her head against his shoulder as they walked, the old camera bouncing lightly against her chest. When they reached the cliff, the wind brushed softly by them, carrying the warmth of the setting sun. Sandra lifted the camera and took a picture of the horizon, capturing the moment where everything changed. Keanu stood behind her, his arms around her waist, his head resting near hers. For the first time in a long time, Sandra felt peace. For the first time in a long time, Keanu felt whole. And together, they watched the sunset, knowing that something quiet and beautiful had begun, not because of fate, not because of chance, but because kindness had brought them back to themselves, and then to each other.